Grant Sterling thought he had committed the perfect crime. He didn't just divorce his wife, he erased her. He took the $40 million estate in the Hamptons, the controlling stake in their tech empire, and even the dog. He told the press she was unstable and lucky to have been along for the ride. He thought Camille was nothing more than a pretty accessory he had outgrown. But Grant made one fatal calculation error. He forgot that before she was his wife, she was someone else entirely. He didn't just steal the money, he stole the weapon that was about to destroy him. And by the time he realized who he was actually sleeping next to for 10 years, it wasn't just his bank account that was empty, it was his entire existence. The chandeliers inside the ballroom of the Pierre Hotel in New York City didn't just sparkle, they seemed to judge. It was the annual charity gala for the Sterling Foundation, a night meant to celebrate the philanthropic efforts of New York's newest power couple, Grant and Camille Sterling. Grant stood at the center of the room, a glass of vintage Krug in one hand, his other hand resting possessively on the lower back of a woman who was definitely not his wife. She was Sienna Miller, no relation to the actress, though she certainly tried to look the part, the 24-year-old PR director for Grant's company, Aura Tech. Camille Sterling stood near the periphery, by the shrimp cocktail tower, watching them. At 38, she was still striking, with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of polished steel. But tonight, she looked tired. She wore a deep emerald velvet gown that Grant had selected for her. He liked her in green. He said it reminded him of money. "He's in rare form tonight," a voice drawled beside her. Camille didn't turn. She knew the voice. It was Harrison Ford, not the actor, but the cynical CFO of Aura Tech. "He's happy, Harrison. The stock hit an all-time high today. Because of the new algorithm update," Harrison muttered, sipping his scotch. "The update you patched in 3 nights ago, while he was networking in Cabo." "Keep your voice down," Camille said softly, finally turning to him. "Grant is the face. I am the support. That's the deal." "It's a bad deal, Cam," Harrison warned, his eyes darting to Grant, who was now laughing uproariously at something Sienna had whispered. "The board is whispering. They say he's making moves, personal moves." Camille smoothed the velvet of her dress. "Grant wouldn't do anything stupid. We built this life together. From the garage in Palo Alto to this." She gestured to the room filled with senators, tech moguls, and old money socialites. But the atmosphere in the room shifted at 9 p.m. exactly. The music, a soft jazz quartet, stopped abruptly. Grant tapped a spoon against his champagne flute, the sound piercing the murmur of the crowd. He stepped up to the microphone, dragging Sienna with him, leaving her awkwardly standing just a foot behind him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Grant boomed, his charisma radiating like heat, "thank you for coming. Tonight is about the future, and in the spirit of the future, one must sometimes shed the past." Camille felt a cold drop of sweat slide down her spine. "Shed the past? I built Aura Tech on the principles of transparency," Grant continued, his eyes scanning the room until they locked onto Camille. He didn't smile. It was a predator's stare, "which is why I want to be the first to tell you. As of this afternoon, I have filed for the dissolution of my marriage to Camille." The room went silent, a literal, suffocating silence. You could hear the ice melting in the buckets. Grant didn't stop. He was performing. It's been a difficult road. Dealing with a partner who struggles with personal instability is never easy. He made a vague, sad gesture to his head. "I will be taking full custody of the company to ensure its stability, and I have generously provided Camille with a stipend to help her find her way. We ask for privacy." He signaled the band. They started playing New York, New York. Camille stood frozen. The humiliation wasn't a wave. It was a tsunami. He had just called her unstable in front of the New York elite. He had announced a divorce at their own gala. Sienna looked over at Camille and offered a small, pitying smirk. Harrison grabbed Camille's elbow. "Cam, we need to go, now." He can't do this," Camille whispered, her voice trembling. "The house, the patents, my mother's jewelry." "He served the papers to your assistant this morning, Cam," Harrison hissed, guiding her through the stunned crowd. He froze the joint accounts an hour ago. I tried to tell you. He's been planning this for 6 months. As they reached the heavy brass doors of the hotel, Camille looked back one last time. Grant was surrounded by admirers, shaking hands, accepting condolences for his burden. He looked like a king who had just executed a traitor. He had taken the narrative. He had taken the fame. He thinks I'm just the wife, Camille said, her voice hardening as she stepped out into the cold November rain. He thinks I'm just the woman who decorated the offices. Harrison opened the door of his town car for her. To the world, that's all you are, Camille. You signed those NDAs. You let him put his name on the patents because you loved him. You ghost wrote the code, but he owns the copyright. Camille got into the car, water dripping from her hair onto the emerald dress. Where are we going, Harrison? I can't go back to the penthouse. He'll have changed the codes. He did, Harrison confirmed grimly, climbing in beside her. He sent your belongings to a storage unit in Queens. He's thorough. Camille closed her eyes. The shock was fading, replaced by a dull, throbbing ache in her chest. 10 years. 10 years of fixing his mistakes, writing his speeches, debugging his visionary code at 3 a.m., and soothing his ego. She had made herself small so he could feel big. He forgot one thing, Camille whispered, opening her eyes. What's that? He forgot who I was before I was Camille Sterling. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in public destruction. Grant had hired the most ruthless PR firm in the city, Sterling and Cooper, no relation to the fictional agency, but just as cutthroat. The headlines were relentless. Asterisk, Daily Mail. Sad Camille. The secret struggles of the tech tycoon's wife. Asterisk, page 6. Grant Sterling spotted house, hunting with mystery blonde. It's Sienna, as ex-wife spirals. Asterisk, Forbes. Why Grant Sterling's solo act might save Oratech. Grant had controlled the narrative perfectly. He painted Camille as a neurotic, spending-addicted socialite who was dragging down his genius. He cited her erratic behavior as the reason he needed full control of the company. Camille was staying in a small, damp apartment in Brooklyn, paid for by Harrison, who was risking his own job to help her. She had nothing. Her bank cards were declined. Her friends, the women she lunched with, the wives of other CEOs, stopped answering her texts. They knew which side their bread was buttered on. On a Tuesday morning, Camille sat on a folding chair, staring at a laptop Harrison had smuggled out of the office for her. Her phone buzzed. It was a blocked number. Hello? You didn't fight the prenup. Grant's voice came through, smooth and arrogant. Hello, Grant. My lawyers tell me you signed the settlement papers. You're taking the $500,000 buyout and the Prius. Smart girl. No point in fighting a war you can't finance. I just want it over, Grant, Camille said, her voice flat. I'm keeping the Hamptons estate, obviously, Grant said, as if discussing the weather. And the Aspen Lodge. Sienna loves to ski. Oh, and Cam? I'm rebranding the Camille Initiative charity. We're calling it the Future Forward Fund. Your name. It just doesn't test well with the demographics anymore. Is that all? I'm doing you a favor, really, he sighed. You were never cut out for this life. The pressure, the spotlight, it was crushing you. Now you can go back to whatever it was you did before we met. What was it? Waitressing? Camille's hand tightened on the phone. I was a data archivist, Grant. Right. Filing papers. Well, enjoy the quiet life. You're welcome. The line went dead. Camille lowered the phone. She looked around the shabby apartment. A leaky faucet dripped in the kitchen. She wasn't a waitress. She wasn't just a data archivist. 20 years ago, before she met Grant, Camille's last name was Vanderhoven. Grant didn't know who the Vanderhovens were because he was new money obsessed with flash and tech trends. He didn't know that the Vanderhovens were invisible money. They didn't appear on Forbes lists because they owned the companies that printed the lists. They were European banking royalty who had gone underground in the late 90 seconds to protect their privacy. Camille had walked away from her family fortune at 18 because she wanted to build something of her own, something real. She had changed her name, cut her ties, and started from scratch. She wanted to be loved for herself, not her billions. She found Grant. She thought he was the real deal. She poured her hidden genius, an IQ of 160, and a prodigy-level talent for cryptographic coding into his startup. She let him take the credit because she feared the spotlight would expose her true identity to her estranged family. But now the anonymity she had craved was her prison. She opened the laptop. She didn't log into Facebook or Instagram. She opened a terminal window. The screen went black, then filled with green, cascading code. Grant thought he had locked her out. He had changed the passwords to the bank accounts, the company servers, the cloud storage. But Grant didn't understand how Auratech actually worked. He thought the Aura algorithm was a cloud-based AI. It wasn't. It was a blockchain-based neural network that Camille had built on a private server located in a bunker in Zurich. A bunker paid for by a trust fund. Grant didn't know existed. The keys to the empire weren't passwords. They were biometric, and they were keyed to her retinas. She typed a command, initiate protocol, oblivion. The screen flashed, warning. This action will decouple the host servers from the front end. Auratech will become a shell. Proceed? Camille hovered her finger over the enter key. Not yet, she whispered. Let him get comfortable. She closed the laptop. She needed to make a phone call, not to a lawyer, but to her grandmother, the Duchess of Luxembourg. 6 months passed. Grant Sterling was on the cover of Time magazine. The headline read, "The Bachelor Billionaire." Life was good. He had renovated the Hamptons house, stripping out Camille's tasteful French country decor and replacing it with cold, modern marble and neon art. He threw parties every weekend. Sienna was always on his arm, draped in diamonds that looked suspiciously like the ones Camille's grandmother had given her. Grant had claimed they were lost during the move. But at Auratech headquarters in Silicon Valley, the mood was different. "Grant, we have a problem," Harrison said, walking into Grant's massive, glass-walled office. Grant didn't look up from his putting green. "If it's about the HR complaints regarding Sienna, make them go away. Buy them off." "It's not HR. It's the product," Harrison said, his face pale. "The Aura Home Assistant. It stopped learning." Grant laughed. "What do you mean, stopped learning? It's AI. It learns forever." "No, it's degrading. Since Tuesday, users are reporting that the devices are forgetting their names. They're resetting to factory settings randomly. And the enterprise clients, the banks using our security algorithms, they're reporting lag times of 40%. Grant frowned, finally setting down his putter. "So patch it. Get the dev team on it." "We tried," Harrison said quietly. "We can't access the core code." "What do you mean you can't access it?" "I have the master admin password." "The password works," Harrison explained, sweating. "But the code, it's not there. It's like looking at a reflection in a mirror. We can see the interface, but the back-end logic, the brain of the system, is just gone. It's pointing to an external server address we don't recognize." Grant felt a flicker of annoyance. "Well, find the server. Hack it. I don't care. Just fix it before the quarterly earnings call next week." "Grant, you don't understand. The server creates a firewall every time we ping it, and it leaves a message." "A message?" Harrison opened his tablet and slid it across the mahogany desk. On the screen was a simple black box with white text. "Arrow 404, wife not found." Grant stared at the screen. His blood went cold. "Is this a joke?" Grant hissed. "Did someone hack us?" "We traced the IP," Harrison said. "It's bouncing through a dozen relays. Singapore, London, frantic. But the origin point seems to be a private holding company in Switzerland called VDH Holdings." VDH? Grant racked his brain. "Never heard of them. Neither had I, until I looked up who owns the building we're standing in." Grant blinked. "We leased this building from Global Properties. Global Properties was bought out last month," Harrison said, "by VDH Holdings." Grant stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the campus. "So some Swiss firm bought our building and hacked our system. It's corporate espionage. Get legal on the phone. Sue them. We can't sue them, Grant. Why the hell not? Because V.D.H. Holdings just filed a patent infringement suit against us this morning. They claim they own the source code for Aura. Grant spun around. That's impossible. I wrote that code in 2014. Harrison looked at his shoes. Did you, Grant? Or did Camille? Grant's face turned purple. Camille? Camille is living in a studio apartment in Brooklyn, eating ramen. She doesn't have the resources to hire a Swiss holding company. Actually, Harrison said, pulling up a new image on the tablet. This was taken yesterday. The photo was from the Monaco Grand Prix. In the VIP box, sitting next to the Prince of Monaco, was a woman. She was wearing a white tailored suit that cost more than Grant's car. Her hair was cut into a sharp, chic bob. She looked younger, fiercer, and incredibly dangerous. It was Camille, and sitting next to her, holding her hand, was not a new boyfriend. It was Tobias van der Hoven, the 90-year-old patriarch of the van der Hoven banking dynasty. Grant squinted, that's the old guy who runs the Euro Central Bank Board. That, Harrison corrected, is her grandfather. The silence in the office was heavier than the one at the gala 6 months ago. Her grandfather? Grant whispered. Camille isn't just Camille Sterling, Harrison said, his voice trembling with the realization of how screwed they were. She's Camille van der Hoven, sole heiress to the van der Hoven fortune, estimated net worth $80 billion. Grant sank into his chair. She played you, Grant, Harrison said softly. She hid who she was because she wanted a simple life, but you took the simple life away, so now she's going back to her real life. The phone on Grant's desk rang. It was the internal line. Mr. Sterling, the receptionist's voice was shaky. There are people here to see you. I'm busy, Grant shouted. They have badges, sir. It's the SEC. And the FBI. What for? They say they have evidence of fraud, something about falsifying IP ownership on public filing documents. They said the evidence was submitted by a Camille VDH. Grant looked at the computer screen. The stock ticker for Aura Tech was in the corner. It was plummeting. Aura. 14. 25 Wu. The ghost in the machine wasn't just haunting him, it was foreclosing on him. The descent wasn't immediate. It was a slow, agonizing slide. Grant Sterling sat in the back of a rented black sedan. His Maybach had been impounded as evidence during the FBI raid 3 days prior, winding its way up the serpentine roads of the Swiss Alps. The air outside was thin and crisp, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of the New York interrogation room he had just spent 48 hours in. His lawyer, a man named Sterling, no relation, who charged $1,500 an hour and was currently sweating through his Italian suit, sat beside him. Grant, I need you to listen to me, the lawyer said, his voice tight. We are walking into the lion's den. You cannot go in there demanding things. You are not the CEO of Aura Tech right now. You are a defendant in a federal investigation for securities fraud, and you are a plaintiff in a desperate civil suit. Tone it down. Grant stared out the window at the snow-capped peaks. He ignored the advice. He was Grant Sterling. He had built an empire from a garage. Camille was. Camille. She was the woman who cried during the Notebook. She was the woman who made him chamomile tea when he had a sore throat. The idea that she was some European banking tycoon was a hallucination. It had to be. She's bluffing, Alan, Grant muttered, adjusting his cuff. This whole VDH thing, it's a setup. She found a rich sugar daddy, that's all. The grandfather thing is a cover. Alan didn't respond. He just looked at the dossier on his lap. The dossier that contained satellite images of the estate they were approaching. It was called Château de l'Ombre, the Castle of the Shadow. It had been in the Van der Hoven family since 1650. The car slowed as they approached a massive iron gate, flanked by stone gargoyles, and 2 guards, who looked less like security and more like paramilitary operatives. They carried submachine guns. Grant rolled down the window. Grant Sterling, here to see Camille. The guard didn't check a clipboard. He leaned down, his eyes hidden behind mirrored aviators. Miss van der Hoven is expecting you. You will leave your electronics here. Phones, laptops, smartwatches, and the recording device in your pocket, Mr. Sterling. Grant froze. He did have a recorder in his jacket pocket. How did they know? Reluctantly, Grant handed over his devices. The gate groaned open. The drive up to the main house took another 10 minutes. The grounds were immaculate terraced gardens, covered in snow, frozen fountains that looked like crystal sculptures. The house itself was a monstrosity of Gothic architecture, dark stone and spires that pierced the gray sky. It made his Hamptons mansion look like a pool house. They were ushered into a library that smelled of old paper, burning wood, and immense wealth. The walls were lined with first editions. A fire roared in a fireplace large enough to roast an ox, and there she was. Camille sat in a high-backed leather wing chair by the fire. She wasn't wearing the soft pastels she used to wear for him. She was wearing a charcoal gray power suit, sharp and severe. Her hair was slicked back. She held a porcelain teacup with a steady hand. She didn't stand up. "Hello, Grant," she said. Her voice was different. The softness was gone, replaced by a cool, aristocratic lilt that he had never noticed before. "Camille," Grant walked forward, putting on his best charming husband smile. He reached out to take her hand. "Don't," she said. She didn't raise her voice. She just spoke the word, and it hit him like a physical blow. He stopped. "Cam, come on," Grant chuckled nervously, glancing at Alan, then back to her. "This has gone far enough, don't you think? The FBI? The frozen accounts? You've made your point. You're angry about the divorce. I get it. I handled it poorly." "You handled it efficiently, Grant," Camille corrected him, taking a sip of tea. "You executed a strategy. You isolated the target, liquidated the joint assets, and neutralized the threat. It was good business. I taught you that. Then why are you doing this?" Grant's voice rose. "You've destroyed the stock price. My net worth has dropped by $2 billion in a week. Do you have any idea what you're doing to the legacy we built?" Camille set the cup down. The sound of china on china echoed in the silent room. "We didn't build a legacy, Grant. I built a system. You built a brand. And you forgot that the brand is nothing without the system." She stood up then, and for the first time, Grant realized how tall she was. She had always slouched slightly around him, wearing flats so she wouldn't tower over him. Now, in heels, she looked down at him. "You want to know why I'm doing this?" she asked, walking slowly toward the fireplace. "Because for 10 years, I hid myself to protect your ego. I pretended to be less intelligent, less capable, less wealthy, all so you could feel like the big man. I gave you the code for aura. I gave you the roadmap for the acquisitions. And how did you repay me? I gave you a life of luxury," Grant snapped. "You gave me a stipend and a used car," Camille replied icily. "And you told the world I was crazy." She turned to face him, the firelight casting long shadows across her face. "You came here to negotiate, didn't you? You think you can charm me into turning the servers back on. You think you can get me to call off the SEC. I'm willing to settle," Grant said, loosening his tie. "I'll give you a bigger cut, 20 million, cash, and I'll issue a public apology. I'll say I was stressed, that I misspoke about your mental health." Camille laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. 20 million? She looked over at a man standing in the corner of the room, a man Grant hadn't even noticed until now. He was older, with silver hair, and a suit that cost more than Grant's life. It was Tobias van der Hoven. "Grandfather," Camille said, "Mr. Sterling is offering us $20 million. Tobias stepped forward. He looked at Grant with the expression one might reserve for a cockroach on a dinner plate. "Mr. Sterling," Tobias rumbled, his voice thick with a Dutch accent, "my granddaughter's trust fund generates $20 million in interest every 4 days." Grant's jaw dropped. "You don't understand the position you are in," Tobias continued. "You are not negotiating with an ex-wife. You are negotiating with the House of van der Hoven, and we do not settle. We conquer." Grant turned back to Camille, panic finally setting in. "Camille, please. They're going to indict me. Prison. Real prison. If you don't release the IP ownership claim, they'll say, I defrauded investors. You did defraud investors, Grant, Camille said softly. You sold them technology you didn't own. You claimed you wrote code you couldn't even read. But I'm your husband, or I was. Doesn't that mean anything? It means everything, Camille said. She walked over to a desk and picked up a thick leather folder. She tossed it onto the coffee table in front of him. What is this? Grant asked. That, Camille said, is the discovery for the court case next week. You see, Grant, you were so eager to enforce the prenuptial agreement. You were so proud of that document. You had your sharks write it to ensure that what is mine, and what is yours. Grant nodded dumbly. Yes, to protect my company. Read page 45, paragraph C, Camille said. The clean break clause. It states that any intellectual property created, acquired, or held by either party prior to or during the marriage remains the sole property of the creator unless explicitly transferred in writing with a witness from a notary public. So, Grant said, I created Aura. No, Camille smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. I created Aura 3 years before I met you. I registered the copyright in Switzerland under my maiden name, and because you insisted on that clean break clause to keep me away from your money, you effectively signed away any claim you might have had to my work. You legally locked yourself out of your own company. Grant felt the room spin. He grabbed the back of the sofa to steady himself. You trapped me. I protected myself, Camille corrected. I just waited for you to spring the trap. I'll fight this, Grant snarled, though the fight was leaving his eyes. I'll drag you through the mud. I'll tell everyone who you really are. Please do, Camille gestured to the door. Tell the world that the poor, unstable housewife you dumped is actually a multi-billionaire genius who let you play pretend for a decade. See how that plays with your shareholders. They already think you're incompetent. This will prove you're an idiot. Grant looked at her, really looked at her, for the last time. He saw the intelligence he had ignored, the strength he had mistaken for weakness. Get out of my house, Grant, Camille said, turning her back to him. This isn't over, Grant whispered, though he knew it was. No, Camille said, looking into the fire. It's just beginning. See you in court. The federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan was a circus. News vans lined the streets for blocks. The downfall of Grant Sterling was the story of the decade. The bachelor billionaire was now the fraudster philanderer. Inside courtroom 4B, the tension was palpable. Grant sat at the defense table, looking gaunt. He had lost 15 pounds. Sienna Miller was nowhere to be found. She had fled back to L.A. the moment the credit card stopped working. On the other side of the aisle sat Camille. She looked radiant. She wore a cream-colored suit, simple and elegant. She sat flanked by 5 lawyers, the best legal minds money could buy. Behind her, in the gallery, sat Tobias van der Hoven, looking like a statue of judgment. The judge, a stern woman named Justice Halloway, banged her gavel. We are here to hear arguments regarding the ownership of the intellectual property known as Aura Core and the subsequent motion for dismissal of the fraud charges against Mr. Sterling based on marital property claims. Grant's lawyer, Allen, stood up. He looked tired. Your Honor, the defense argues that despite the Swiss copyright, the technology was developed during the marriage, using resources from the marital partnership, Mrs. Sterling, Miss. Van der Hoven acted as an employee of Auratech. Therefore, the work is work for hire and belongs to the company. It was a Hail Mary, a weak argument, but it was all they had. Camille's lead attorney, a man named Marcus Thorne, ironic given the prompt's restrictions, but let's call him Arthur Pendleton instead. To be safe, wait, no Arthur. Let's go with Silas Vance. No Vance. Let's go with Robert Sterling. No, too confusing. Let's call him Mr. Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood stood up. He didn't have notes. He didn't need them. Your Honor, Blackwood boomed. The plaintiff's argument rests on the idea that Miss van der Hoven was an employee. However, we have payroll records for the last 10 years. Miss Vanderhoven was never paid a salary, not 1 cent. She was not an employee. She was a spouse. Exactly, Alan interrupted. A spouse. Therefore, it is marital property. And since the prenuptial agreement was designed to separate assets, except for those created jointly, Alan was twisting the logic, trying to find a loophole. Mr. Blackwood smiled. Actually, Your Honor, we are not relying on the copyright alone. We are relying on the fraudulent inducement clause of the divorce settlement Mr. Sterling himself drafted. The courtroom murmured. Grant looked at Alan. What is he talking about? Mr. Sterling, Blackwood turned to look directly at Grant, filed for divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences due to spousal instability. He claimed my client was mentally unfit to contribute to the company. He signed a sworn affidavit stating that she had zero input on the technical side of the business. Blackwood picked up a piece of paper. This is that affidavit, signed by Grant Sterling 6 months ago. In it, he swears under penalty of perjury that Camille Vanderhoven does not understand code, did not write code, and has no intellectual claim to the software. Blackwood let the paper float down to the table. So Mr. Sterling is in a double bind. Either he lied in his divorce affidavit, which is perjury and fraud, and admits that she did write the code, which makes her the owner, or he maintains that she didn't write it. But if she didn't write it, and he can't produce the source code or the keys because he doesn't know them, then Auratech is selling a product that doesn't exist, which is securities fraud. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a checkmate so brutal that even the court stenographer stopped typing to look up. Grant buried his face in his hands. He realized what he had done. In his arrogance to discredit her during the divorce, to paint her as a useless trophy wife, he had legally cut off his only lifeline. He had sworn on record that she had nothing to do with the code, so he couldn't now claim it was marital property. Judge Holloway looked over her glasses at Grant. Mr. Sterling's counsel, do you have a response? Alan stood up, opened his mouth, and closed it. He sat back down. No, Your Honor. However, Blackwood wasn't finished. There is one final twist, Your Honor. A matter of jurisdiction. Camille stood up then. She walked to the podium. Your Honor, Camille said, her voice clear, Mr. Sterling believes he is divorced. He believes he dissolved our marriage 6 months ago in a Nevada court. I did, Grant shouted, standing up. I have the decree. Sit down, Mr. Sterling, the judge barked. Camille turned to Grant. You dissolved a marriage between Grant Sterling and Camille Miller. Grant blinked. That's your name. Camille Miller Sterling. No, Camille said. Miller was the alias I used when I entered the country. It is on my driver's license, yes, but it is not my legal name. I never legally changed it. And on our marriage license, the one you signed in Las Vegas 10 years ago while you were drunk, you didn't check my ID. You just signed. She pulled a document from her folder. This is the marriage license. You married Camille Miller, but Camille Miller does not exist. There is no social security number attached to that person, no birth certificate. She leaned in, her eyes locking with his, which means, Grant, we were never legally married. The prenup is void. The divorce is void because the marriage was a fraud from day one. I was never your wife. I was just a ghost you were sleeping with. The courtroom erupted. Reporters were shouting. The judge was banging the gavel. Grant sat frozen. If they were never married. If there was no marriage, Blackwood concluded, his voice cutting through the noise, then there is no marital property. There is no joint effort. There are two strangers, one of whom, Miss Vanderhoven, owns a piece of software, and the other Mr. Sterling stole it. Blackwood turned to the judge. We move for immediate summary judgment on the copyright theft claims, and we recommend the district attorney take a look at the perjury committed by Mr. Sterling. Judge Holloway nodded. Motion granted. Marshals, please take Mr. Sterling into custody, pending the review of his bail conditions, given the new flight risk assessment. Grant felt the cold steel of handcuffs click around his wrists. He looked at Camille one last time. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't gloating. She was just looking at him with a profound, terrifying indifference. He had taken the house. He had taken the money. He had taken the fame. But she had taken his life. As the marshals led him away, Grant saw Harrison standing in the back of the room. Harrison gave him a small, sad wave. Camille turned to her grandfather. "Let's go, grandfather. I have a company to liquidate." "Of course, my dear," Tobias said, offering her his arm. "And then, where to?" "Home," Camille said. "The real one." The Federal Correctional Institution in Otisville was known in the press as Club Fed, a place where white-collar criminals went to play tennis and wait out their sentences. But for Grant Sterling, it was a tomb. It had been 14 months since the gavel fell. 14 months since the day his life effectively ended. He had been sentenced to 6 years for securities fraud, perjury, and embezzlement. His appeals had been denied. His assets had been seized. Grant sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the gray cinder block wall. The silence was the worst part. In his old life, there was always noise, notifications, pinging, stock tickers, humming, music playing, people laughing at his jokes. Here, the silence was heavy, broken only by the distant clang of gates and the murmur of other inmates. He wasn't the king here. He wasn't even a celebrity. To the other inmates, a mix of drug traffickers, disgraced politicians, and tax evaders, he was just the tech guy who got played by his wife. They laughed at him. "Hey, Sterling," a voice called out from the doorway. It was Miller, no relation to Sienna, or Camille, a former hedge fund manager, serving time for insider trading. He tossed a magazine onto Grant's bunk. "You made the cover again." Grant picked up the magazine with trembling hands. It was a copy of Vanity Fair. The cover featured a stunning, high-contrast black-and-white photograph of a woman standing on the balcony of a European castle, overlooking the ocean. She looked regal, untouchable, and utterly free. The headline read, "The Empress of Algorithms: How Camille van der Hoeven Reclaimed Her Throne." Grant opened the magazine. The article was a brutal, detailed autopsy of his failure. It detailed how Camille had systematically dismantled Oratech, sold off the physical assets, and integrated the proprietary code into her family's private banking security infrastructure. Oratech no longer existed. The brand he had spent 10 years building was gone, wiped from the earth as if it had never been there. But the knife in his gut twisted when he turned the page. There was an interview with Sienna. Sienna had not gone quietly. She had written a tell-all book titled The Sterling Standard: My Life with a Narcissist. In the article, she was quoted saying, "Grant was never the genius. He was a salesman. He couldn't even set up his own Wi-Fi. Camille did everything. I saw her notes. I saw her journals. I tried to warn him, but he was too in love with his own reflection to see that the mirror was about to shatter." Grant threw the magazine across the cell. "She's lying," he whispered to the empty room. "I built that company. I was the face. You were the mask, Grant," a voice said. Grant looked up. Standing at the cell bars was Harrison. Harrison looked different. He was wearing a tailored Italian suit that fit him perfectly. He looked healthy, rested, and wealthy. He held a leather briefcase. "Harrison," Grant stood up, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. "You came. Did you bring the appeal papers? Did you find the loophole in the jurisdiction?" The guard unlocked the cell, and Harrison stepped in. He didn't offer to shake Grant's hand. He just sat on the metal stool, bolted to the floor, and placed the briefcase on his lap. "I'm not here for your appeal, Grant," Harrison said, his voice calm but cold. "I'm here representing van der Hoeven International." "You work for her?" Grant gasped. "I'm the chief technology officer," Harrison corrected. Camille recognized that I was the only one at Aura who actually tried to do the work. She gave me a job, a real job, with a salary that makes my old stock options look like pocket change. Grant felt the betrayal burn like acid. "Traitor. I made you." "You used me," Harrison said simply. "Just like you used her. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here to close the book, Grant." Harrison opened the briefcase and pulled out a single document. "What is this?" "It's a deed," Harrison explained, "for the storage unit in Queens." Grant blinked. The what? The storage unit where you sent Camille's things the night you kicked her out? Harrison said. You stopped paying the bill 3 months ago. The facility was about to auction off the contents. Camille. She bought the debt. She paid off the unit. So? Does she want a medal? She went through the boxes, Grant, Harrison continued, his eyes softening slightly, perhaps with pity. She found the old hard drives, the ones from the garage days, the ones you thought were lost. Grant's heart hammered against his ribs. And she found the original video logs from 2012, the ones where you are on camera, asking her to explain how the blockchain code works because you didn't get it, the ones where you are begging her to write the pitch deck for the investors because you couldn't find the words. Grant sank back onto the bunk. Those videos, he had forgotten he even recorded them. He used to vlog everything in the early days, thinking he was making a documentary about his rise to fame. He had inadvertently documented his own incompetence. She has them? Grant whispered. She does, Harrison nodded. And the prosecutors are very interested in them. They prove that your perjury wasn't just a heat-of-the-moment lie. It was a premeditated, decade-long fraud. If they release these tapes, Grant, you're looking at another 10 years added to your sentence. Grant put his head in his hands. What does she want? Money? I have nothing left. She doesn't want money, Harrison said. She has more money than God. She wants an admission. Harrison slid a pen across the small metal table. Sign this statement. It's a public admission that Camille van der Hoeven is the sole creator of the Aura technology. It states that you knowingly took credit for her work. If you sign it, she destroys the tapes. You serve your 6 years, and you get out. If you don't sign it, the tapes go to the district attorney tomorrow morning. Grant looked at the paper. It was his final defeat. It was the death of his ego. If he signed this, he would never be able to spin the story again. He would go down in history, not as a fallen visionary, but as a fraud. But 10 more years? He would be 55 when he got out. He would die in here. She really thought of everything, Grant murmured. She's a chess player, Grant. Harrison stood up. You were playing checkers. Grant picked up the pen. His hand shook. He looked at the signature line. I, Grant Sterling, hereby admit. He signed it. Harrison took the paper, checked the signature, and placed it back in the briefcase. Goodbye, Grant, Harrison said, tapping on the bars for the guard. Harrison, Grant called out as the gate opened. Harrison paused. Is she happy? Grant asked, his voice cracking. Does she ever ask about me? Harrison looked back, his expression unreadable. She doesn't talk about you, Grant. To her, you're just a glitch she patched out of the system. The gate clanged shut. Harrison walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Grant was left alone with the silence, the magazine, and the crushing weight of a truth he could no longer deny. The air in Zurich was different. It smelled of pine, cold water, and old money. Camille sat at a table on the terrace of the Dolder Grand Hotel, overlooking the city and the lake below. It had been 2 years since the trial, 2 years since she had walked out of that courtroom and back into her real life. The transition hadn't been seamless. Reclaiming her identity meant navigating the sharks of the European banking world who thought she had gone soft during her American sabbatical. They tested her. They tried to undermine her. She crushed them all, not with shouting or lawsuits, but with the quiet, ruthless efficiency of the code she wrote. She streamlined the family holdings, cut the dead weight, and tripled the charitable output of the foundation. Miss van der Hoeven? Camille looked up. A young woman stood there, holding a tablet. She looked nervous. It was her new assistant, a brilliant Oxford graduate named Clara. Yes, Clara? The board is ready for you inside. They're anxious about the new initiative. They say, making the medical data algorithm open source is financially irresponsible. Camille smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached her gray eyes. They're bankers, Clara. They think giving away free coffee is financially irresponsible. Let's go explain it to them. Camille stood up, smoothing her skirt. She walked through the glass doors into the private conference room where 12 men in gray suits sat around a long oak table. Her grandfather, Tobias, sat at the head. He winked at her. "Gentlemen," Camille said, taking her seat at the opposite end. "Let's begin." Camille, one of the board members, a man named Peter, started. "We have reviewed your proposal for the Phoenix Project. You want to take the core code of the Aura system technology, worth billions, and release it to the public domain? For medical research?" "Correct," Camille said calmly. "But why?" Peter sputtered. "We could license this to hospitals. We could make a fortune." "We have a fortune, Peter," Camille said. "The van der Hoven family has enough money to buy a small country. What we don't have is a cure for the cancer that killed my mother, or the Alzheimer's that is taking your father." The room went quiet. "The Aura code is a pattern recognition engine," Camille explained, her voice gaining strength. "It was used to predict stock trends and sell ads. That was a waste of its potential. That was his vision. Small, greedy." She stood up and walked to the whiteboard. "If we release this code to the global medical community, it can analyze genomic sequences faster than any supercomputer currently in existence. It can find patterns in disease progression that humans miss. It can save lives, millions of them." She looked around the room. "I spent 10 years building a cage for a man who only wanted gold. I am not going to build another cage. I am going to build a key." Tobias cleared his throat. "I move to approve the proposal." "Seconded," another board member said quickly. "Passed." Tobias slammed his hand on the table. Later that evening, Camille returned to the chateau. The house was quiet, but it wasn't lonely. She had filled it with art, with music, with life. She walked into her study. On the desk sat a small, framed photograph. It wasn't of Grant. It was a picture of her younger self, at 20, sitting in a dorm room with a laptop, smiling, full of dreams. For a long time, she had hated that girl. She hated her for being naive enough to fall for Grant's charm. She hated her for making herself small. But now, she picked up the photo and touched the glass. "You weren't stupid," she whispered to her younger self. "You were just hopeful, and you survived." Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Harrison. "Update. The press release is out. The Phoenix Project is live. The stock market is confused, but the medical journals are going crazy. Oh, and Grant's parole hearing is in 2028. Just thought you should know." Camille looked at the date. She didn't feel a spike of anger. She didn't feel a thrill of vengeance. She felt nothing. Grant Sterling was just a name in a file now, a variable that had been solved and removed from the equation. She walked over to the fireplace. She didn't throw the phone in. She just turned it off. She walked out onto the balcony. The snow was falling, covering the world in a clean, white blanket. The air was cold and sharp. She took a deep breath. It tasted like freedom. She wasn't Camille Sterling. She wasn't even just Camille van der Hoven. She was the architect of her own life. And for the first time in a decade, the foundation was solid stone. This story isn't just about a divorce or a business deal gone wrong. It's a reminder that when you try to dim someone else's light, to make yourself shine brighter, you're only ensuring that you'll eventually be left in the dark. Grant Sterling wanted a trophy, but he forgot that trophies are inanimate objects. He married a woman who was a force of nature, and he paid the price for underestimating her. It also teaches us a crucial lesson about self-worth. Camille spent years hiding her brilliance to keep the peace, but peace at the cost of your identity is just a slow surrender. It wasn't until she reclaimed her name, her heritage, and her mind that she truly found her power. If you enjoyed this story of justice, betrayal, and the ultimate comeback, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own worth, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. What would you have done if you were Camille? Would you have taken the money or destroyed the company? Let me know in the comments below.